loud. So everything we say now is going to be recorded. But I'm not going to, I see we only have 5 people so far, so I'm going to wait. Okay, we're still not, yeah, it's still not time. So.
And we're a late arriving crowd.
Right. So we always give everybody a few extra minutes after 7:30. So we'll start at 7:32. And then, like I said, I will make the introductions. I'll welcome people. You know what, I'm just thinking, just make sure that text keeps appearing. Just keep pressing it with your fingers because it'll disappear after 15 seconds.
Right. I get it. Let me get my glasses.
Yeah.
Hey, Jen. How you doing?
Okay.
Hi, I'm good.
Oh, good. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
Yeah. Glad you could show up.
I love the little documentary. Very interesting. I have a friend who just retired officially from the Israeli Air Force. The ceremony was last week.
Wow. So
yeah.
Were you able to see it on Zoom?
No, I didn't even ask. No, he just told me about it.
Great.
Yeah, they retired him.
Was it an age thing?
I think so. He's 51.
Oh, well, hopefully he'll have a second career.
Oh yeah, she'll be demand.
That wasn't his career. That's his. That was his
He's
reserve.
In the reserves?
Oh,
he's in the reserves.
Yeah.
Actually, I think quote unquote mandatory retirement from reserves is like 44 or 45, unless you have a special skill or they really like you. So
yeah, I think he trains.
Yes.
He does training or something.
Oh, here's Iris.
During the 6-Day War, when IAI had to shut down, about 1,500 retired IAI employees came back to take the place of all those other IAI people who were called up in reserves. But those stories never get out. They come back and work for free.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Wow.
Mm.
They came from wherever they were at the time, because if they were retired, so you came from the United States and
No. I'm talking about Israelis.
oh, Israeli.
Israelis who had retired.
Hi, Marvin.
Hi, David.
Okay, we're really looking forward.
No.
Hi, Iris.
Hi, Iris.
Oh, hi. Lee will join us in a little while.
No problem.
He had to work late.
Yeah. No, okay. We're going to give it another few minutes. I'm just going to put a reminder in the chat box to please put your questions in the chat box. There we go. Okay. So Sharon, I just put something in the chat box. Do you see it pop up?
Yeah, on the right.
I see the chat box, but I don't see what you put in there.
You put it on the right, isn't it?
Where?
Yeah.
I see
Yes.
it.
Yeah, it could just, no, I'm just saying, I'm just asking to make sure it actually worked. That's all.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So still are there another minute? We could talk among ourselves. Then I'm gonna either ask you to mute yourselves or we'll mute you for you, and then we'll get going. Yeah, more people are joining.
That's good.
Ready to go tomorrow, Jen? For your class?
I'm ready.
Yay. We had an outdoor class on Sunday. It was so nice.
Oh, good. Up in Van Cortlandt Manor.
Yeah.
Cortland Manor, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a nice class, no homework, or no one grade your homework.
It's free. It's very freeing to dance outside.
I know. I definitely will join you one of these days.
When you're ready.
So
Linda, you're recording
Yeah,
this.
we'll wait another few.
minutes.
See, we're getting
no
a lot of
comment.
people. Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
It's nice.
It just-
But Linda, you're recording this?
It
Yes.
is on, the recording is to the
Thank you.
cloud. After it's over, I can ask Ally what the link is, and people will be able to click on the link, and with the password, they'll have access. Oh, my brother is here.
Hey.
Good.
He's the one with the picture of my mother and the little boy.
Uh,
Oh, where'd he go?
I don't know. Oh, there he is. Robert, your camera is showing us the top of your head only. There you go. Hi, Robert.
Look much better now.
I saw
How are you?
Seems-
Once again, folks, if you're looking to exit at Newer Cell, the first two cars will not open at Newer Cell. Please walk back now.
Somebody's on the train.
Metro North?
All passengers to
Oh,
exit
my
at Newer
God.
Cell.
You know what? I'm gonna start muting people.
I hope that's not Lee.
Well, I'm gonna start muting people just because, except for myself and Sharon and of course the speaker. And that way we won't hear extraneous noises. And just a reminder to people that if you are listening, please keep your screen on mute as long as this person is speaking. During the Q&A, we're asking people to put their questions in the chat box. And of course, if we have, I know it's a little hard to moderate when there's a lot of people speaking at once. So I think we'll just keep it with the chat box as the question holder for now. And my husband, Mark, is going to help us with that part. But anyway, I think what I'll do is I'll start the ball rolling. Just want to introduce the people who are going to be presenting tonight. First of all, we have Sharon Shafritz, who's going to introduce our speaker, who is Marvin Klemow, who's going to speak to us about briefly, or maybe not briefly, but in great depth and great detail about Al Schwimmer, the TWA flight engineer who assembled a group of American pilots on a dangerous mission, which was to acquire and smuggle airplanes and arms to rescue what was then the new state of Israel in 1948. After this war, the remarkable man developed the Israel Aircraft Industries, IAI, and David Ben Gurion had referred to Al as the greatest gift America gave Israel. So as we said in the email reminder, this film is available on Amazon Prime. And if you haven't watched it yet, please do after the talk. And we're going to have Marvin, I'm going to spotlight him in a moment. But first, I'm going to ask Sharon, who's actually a relative of his, to say a few words. So I'm going to spotlight Sharon for a moment.
Okay.
All
All
right.
right. So when I spoke to Marvin how he wanted to be introduced, he would like you to know that he really started out as a local boy. He was born at Portchester Hospital, lived at 45 Purdy Street in Harrison until he was 5 years old, and he still remembers all the wonderful times he had going to Rye Playland. Marvin only had 4 jobs in his life. He began working at the Associated Press as an office boy, but soon became a full-time reporter. From there, he worked at Boeing Aircraft for 7 years, and finally at Israel Aircraft Industries from 1969 until his retirement. He said, "This is really not about him, but it's about Al Schwimmer." But first, I have to make a full disclosure. Marvin is my mishpacha. When I heard he was doing this presentation for so many synagogues during COVID, I wondered, why not Westchester Jewish Center? In the late 1970s, when we first began going to Israel and David started working at the Weizmann Institute of Science, Marvin introduced us to yet another cousin, Yona Klemow-Vitsky. She was Prime Minister Menachem Begin's personal assistant. The most unforgettable experience I've ever had was visiting the office of the Prime Minister in Jerusalem with my family. My sons each had a chance to sit in the Prime Minister's chair. We all shook his hands and sat and schmoozed for a while. So thank you, Marvin.
Okay, so is that the conclusion of your?
That is the conclusion of, yes.
Okay, so now I'm going to replace the spotlight. And now, Marvin, you're on.
Thank you very much. As My cousin said it's nice to come back to Westchester County, although I haven't been there in 70 years. I first want to thank Boaz Dvir, who made the movie and was the director and the writer. And he also has a book called Saving Israel, which is a companion piece to the movie. Boaz and I have been doing a dog and pony show. After the movie came out, I called him and he found out that I knew Al Schwimmer. He was my friend for many years. So he would do the movie and then I would talk about afterwards. But what really triggered me is Al's passing away about 10 years ago. I asked my rabbi, can I speak at the synagogue that Saturday? And this is what I said. A great man was buried in Israel this past Monday. At the funeral, Israel's president, Shimon Peres, called him a legend. Another speaker said he single-handedly laid the foundation for all the high-tech companies that now exist in Israel. A third said he personally raised a generation of engineers for the Israeli defense industry. The final quote at the funeral was, "We have lost a visionary, a distinguished pioneer of technology, a true Zionist. His mark will remain engraved in the annals of the Israeli defense establishment and all of Israeli industry for years to come." And then I said to the synagogue, I'm talking about a man that 99% of you sitting here today probably never even heard his name. His name was Al Schwimmer, and he was my boss for 10 years at Israel Aircraft and my friend and mentor for almost 42 years. What he accomplished in Israel is incredible. And before I get to after the war, somebody at a previous meeting asked, what happened to all those planes and pilots he brought in, which is the subject of the movie? In 1949 and 1950, Al's planes, although Al wasn't directly involved, went down to Yemen and brought out 50,000 Yemenite Jews. But Al knew all the pilots, and he told me the story that these people didn't know what electricity was. They didn't know what running water was. They thought they were coming to Israel in the belly of an eagle, which is what their fable had. People gave birth, women gave birth on the plane. They started fires in the plane to keep warm. Okay, now let's talk about Al. After the war, he went back to the United States. He avoided the scrutiny of the FBI. He beat the charges, although they fined him money, which is another whole long story. And he opened Schwimmer Aviation in Burbank, California. And right after he opened it, Prime Minister Ben Gurion, with Shimon Peres, his quote, military civilian aide, although Peres was never in the military. They came to visit Al in Burbank. They said, Al, what are you doing this year? Come to Israel, we'll start the company, we'll give you the money. And Al agreed. In 1953, he opened Schwimmer, Bedek Aviation. Bedek meaning to go up, like Aliyah. And he started with 70 employees and $1 million from the government. Peres, in his book, years later, said that Schwimmer was fanatical about Israel's security, but he was more fanatical about raising the technological levels in Israel. And what Al did from 53, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, until he left in 79, was to plant seeds about raising the technological level in Israel. And a lot of the time, the fruits of those seeds were picked, but a lot of it was not picked till years after Al left, because sometimes it takes a long time for technology to come to fruition. So I'm just gonna, not in a boring manner, recite some things, but I will go into specific details, but to give you an idea of what happened. I said in 53, started Bedek. In 55, he got Bedek accredited as a United States FAA foreign repair station. Remember that, in 55, he started Bedek as an FAA, which means Bedek could work on American airplanes because their standards were equal to that of the FAA. 30 years later, the fruit came in on that one. In 1959, they began to design airplanes, naval equipment, land equipment. In 1960, they built their first airplane, which was called the Fuga Magister, which was a trainer. And every pilot in the Israeli Air Force after 1961 got its wings on this airplane that Al Schwimmer built. It was built from the French. It was under license. In 1964, they began their first missile, which is the Gabriel, which was on ships all over the world, still in service with the Israeli Navy. In 1967, Al established an electronics company called Elta in Ashdod. The Israeli government always had Al set up the plants, not in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, because they wanted work to be done to create work around the country. All right, what happened next, folks? 1967. What happened in 67? You're all too young to remember, right? The 67 war. What's the first thing that happened in the 67 war? Charles de Gaulle embargoed Israel. He stopped the Mirage deliveries that were coming to Israel. He stopped the gunboats that were coming to Israel. Excuse me. Speaking of Israel, the deserts I get dry. A lot of you, I assume, know about airplanes. I'm sure you've heard of the F-16, the F-15, the F-18, the F-35. These are all airplanes from the United States military, many of which are in the Israeli military today. How many of you ever heard of the F-21? Any hands go up? Well, listen to this story. When Charles de Gaulle stopped the Mirages from coming into Israel, a Swiss engineer building the airplane under license in Switzerland approached Al and the Mossad, and he was mad at de Gaulle. And he says, we're about to stop our production line in Switzerland, but would you like all the plans and the diagrams for the Mirage? And they came up with a system where the Swiss engineer, with his company's knowledge, decided to microfiche all of the plans and with security put them in a furnace and burned them every night, but they had the microfiche. What his company didn't know is every night the back door of the furnace opened and Schwimmer and the Mossad took out the plans and were shipped to Israel. All right, what happened now? 3 years later, it took time. The first Israeli fighter rolls out of the plant. It's called the Nesha. It looks exactly like the Mirage. What a coincidence. But Al and the Israeli Air Force were not satisfied because it was underpowered. So they decided to put a J-79 engine, which really improved in performance. And that new airplane became the Kafir, Baby Lion. And 220 of those airplanes were built as the backbone of the Israeli Air Force. I'm going to interrupt myself several times. Remember, up to 67, the United States was not providing any airplanes to Israel. It was the French. There was a whole series of French airplanes. Okay, 20 years later, the US Navy has a problem. You all know about Top Gun on the West Coast? Well, there was a Top Gun on the East Coast, and it's an aggressor squadron. They use airplanes to compete and train Navy pilots. And John Lehman, the Secretary of the Navy, it's a long story, acquired 12 of the Israeli Kafirs to use in the Navy as an aggressor program. And John calls me up and says, Marvin, it's coming into the Navy. We have to give it a designation. It's the official F-21. So the F-21 is the Israeli Kafir. The first person I called was Al Schwimmer and said, Al, your baby's got now an F-21 designation. We're going to have a big celebration when we deliver the first airplane. But Al, being Al, says, make sure you invite the Swiss engineer. That's Schwimmer. All right, give me a second here. I gotta look at my notes. All right. I told you that I started with 70 employees. By 1967, they had 4,000 employees. But the Israeli government made a decision after what happened in 67. They would never be caught again by an embargo.
Why didn't that go on?
people are business people, and you know what it is. From 67 to 70, I went from 4,000 to 12,000 employees. You know what you have to do to train that many people, to hire that many people, to bring them in? Now, one of the things I noticed on my very first trip to Israel when I went to IAI was some buildings at the front of the gate. And I asked, what are those? And they said, Marvin, that's an art school, O-R-T. And Al brought art into IAI from the very beginning to help train all of these immigrants coming from Africa, from Europe. We had to train not just engineers, but people that cut metal, just simple things. And again, it's all part of what Al said, raising the technological level of Israel at the highest elements. All right, what else did IAI do then? Al recognized that he had to not just concentrate on military equipment, but we needed to have a commercial program. So he went to the United States and he acquired from Rockwell Aviation a program called the Jet Commander, which is a business jet like Learjet or anything. And in order to convince people to buy this, he brought the existing distributor from the United States and Canada and Europe who were selling this airplane to see Israel. And that's how I got involved. When they bought the Jet Commander program, they knew they needed a presentation or presence of someone who understood the American market, who understood Congress, et cetera, et cetera. So I went with those distributors at that first meeting in Israel. When I first, I met Al before that, and I saw something happen there. I remember I came out of Boeing. He asked all the distributors, can I do anything to make this a better airplane, to make it easier to sell? And they all said to a man, move the passenger door to the back of the pilots. So on the fuselage, it used to be in the middle, which ruined the layout. And business jets are bought by rich people who want to be comfortable in their own airplane. And Al said, well, let me think about it. That's an engineering decision, which means we might have to get the FAA to research. Let me think about it. Now, one of the things Al did, he took the people on tour to show them that this was a real company. And as we're walking around, he grabbed my shoulder and he said, come over here, I want to show you something. And he took me to a part of the machine shop where I saw a Yemenite Jew with his skull cap, with his pass, with the tzitzis hanging out. And what was this man doing? He was operating a sophisticated computer numerical control machine. And Al says, you see that guy? He's 30 years old. 20 years ago, he was on one of my airplanes when we brought him out of Yemen, and he didn't even know what electricity was. Again, that's Al's goal, raise the technological level of Israel. I had a problem with Al, a good problem. He had no ego. He couldn't care less about personal praise or anything. All during my time with Al, and even after he retired, I tried to get him nominated for the Aviation Hall of Fame, the International Hall of Fame, which exists in Dayton, Ohio. And his answer is, Marvin, who needs that? What does it buy me? That's not me. And for any of you who watched the movie, the last line by Al Schwimmer says, that's not me, when the interviewer, Boaz, was asking him. Listen to these names of people who are in the Aviation Hall of Fame. You'll know them all. William Boeing, Sandy McDonald, Jack Northrop, Leroy Grumman, Donald Douglas. They all started like Schwimmer, small businessmen growing into huge aerospace companies. All right, it's 1970. IAI is now 12,000 employees. I mentioned that he planted seeds in certain areas that didn't see fruition till years later. Well, let me come back first. While on that first meeting in 1970, after the distributors left, we told Al that we had a problem. that no one knows who Israel Aircraft is. The company changed its name from Bedek to Israel Aircraft. We had 12 or 15 divisions, and each division was known. One was Bedek, one was Elta, one was this one was that one. And they hired a guy in Israel named Elkanah Gali, may he rest in peace, and he was my counterpart. And we went to Al and said, you need to develop a communications program so people will know who you are. They said, all right, come back tomorrow, show me what it costs. So we came back the next day, said it's going to cost $1 million for 3 years. And Al says, what's that $1 million going to buy? And we told him the following, because we knew he would ask. When you go to Argentina and you want to sell an upgrade program, and the chief of the Air Force says, who are you with again? And you say Israel Aircraft Industries, that $1 million is going to buy you one word. That chief of the Air Force is going to say Israel Air, aha. We needed people to say aha when they heard Israel Aircraft Industries. So what did that money buy us? We went to the Paris Air Show. We went to the Farnborough Air Show. We had an advertising campaign to introduce the company. And I found after 50 years, the first ad that we wrote. You can't read it. I'm backing up. Just 30 miles from Jerusalem is an advanced aircraft industry in the world, and you never heard of us. We used the fact that they didn't hear us as the thing. But there's 2 lines in here I got to read. We have low cost of labor, blah, blah, blah. We're very good on delivery on time. Even during the 6-day war, we were not late. Okay, we threw it in as a copy line. The ad appeared in the Flight magazine in London. And the British journal, the Financial Times, which is printed either on green or pink paper, I can't remember, ran an editorial. We just read this ad about a company in Israel we never heard, Israel Aircraft Industries. They claim they deliver on time and that they weren't even late during the 6-day war. We wonder how late could they have been? 6 days? How cheeky. Now, I've told that story for years and I screwed it up because I would always say, how late could they have been? What chutzpah? That in my mind, I translated cheeky to chutzpah, but the original editorial said cheeky. We got a lot of play out of that because they printed the ad again and got us good. All right. I mentioned that Al planted seeds. How many of you have heard about the Arrow missile, David Sling, the Iron Dome? These are the 3 systems that protect Israel against incoming short-range, long-range missiles. All of those 3 systems have the radars from a company called Elta that Al opened in 1967, saying we need to have an electronics decision. I left one thing out. When IAI expanded from 4 to 12,000, it's because Israel did not want to be embargoed again. It was a security decision. So they had to get every technology, and they never had a radar house. So now they have a world-class radar house. The Arrow program is very interesting because of the fights that took place in Israel on it. Now, to show you Schwimmer, he left the company in 1979 politically because the Labor Party lost. Remember, he was Shimon Peres's man, and Menachem Begin comes into office, and they want to put in their own chairman who fights with Al. Al decides to leave. But about 3-4 years later, the phone rings in the Washington office where I'm sitting, and it's Al. Marvin picked me up at the airport. Al, you're in town, great. He says, we've got to become part of SDI. SDI was Strategic Defense Initiative. In other words, it was Reagan and Weinberger's Star Wars, if you remember that, going back 25, 30 years. I called my new president, who was trained by Al, named Moshe Keret. I said, Al just called me, he wants help in the SDI program. And he says, Marvin, do whatever he wants. I forgot to call you. I told him to call you. Get us into that program. So Al sits down and he says, okay, how do we get into SDI? I said, it's like any program we work, Al. You need a policy decision, you need a funding decision, you need a technical decision. The main thing is to get a policy decision. So let me put a team together between APAC and the embassy, and everybody will discuss our approach. And Schwimmer says, no, Marvin, you don't understand. I'm here today. We're going to do it today. Who can you call? I said, Al, who do you work for? I don't understand it. And he pulls out a card. To much my regret, I never kept it. It said special advisor to the prime minister. So he gave me the opening. I picked up the phone and called Richard Pearl, who was the Deputy Secretary of Defense Policy. I said, Richard, Al Schwimmer's here and he's carrying a message from the prime minister. Of course, a little exaggerated, but that's Washington. We got to Richard Pearl and Al was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. He never discussed one technical aspect. He discussed the threat to Israel, what we expect to see in the next 5, 10, 15 years, and how we had to be ready. And Richard Pearl looks at us and says, consider it done. The policy's approved. And we look at him. He says, Richard said, you didn't think we know you guys would be coming? We want Israel to be part of it, just as we want some other countries to be part of it. Richard says, go down the hall and go see General Abramson, who's the head of SDI. We go down the hall, cut it short, knock on the door. Abramson welcomes us in for a 5-minute chat. And an hour and a half later, we leave. And Al, again, is brilliant. And Abramson says, look, we want Israel in SDI, but go get your own money from Congress. Don't use any of my funds. Al goes back to Israel, briefs Shimon Peres, the prime minister, briefs Moshe Keret. A team comes over and we start working funding. And the long story short is we got hundreds of millions of dollars from the United States to develop Arrow, Iron Dome, and Sling. But we had problems. What were our problems? The Israeli Air Force was against the Arrow program. And we had people, we'd go to congressmen and somebody would come from the embassy and say, well, that's not important, but we need more money for UAVs or more money for fighters or more ammunition. So we were fighting a battle internally within Israel. Now, one thing I left out, the Minister of Defense name was Moshe Aarons. Moshe Aarons was the vice president of Israel Aerospace Industries engineering department. And 3 times he was Minister of Defense. He was also ambassador, as you may remember, here in the United States. Well, if you live in Israel or work in Israel, you know how to play the game. I picked up the phone and wrote a letter to the Minister of Defense saying part of your ministry is screwing us and we're going to get hurt by getting funds. He told me to put it in writing. Put it in writing, and you can't read this, but you can see it's on focus. This is a letter from the Minister of Defense to me, signed by Moshe, saying, Marvin, thank you for your letter regarding the Arrow program. You're absolutely correct about the potential negative effect of anti-Arrow leaks from the Israeli military. I'm doing my best to put a stop to it, and I hope you won't see it anymore. And he gave the orders and it stopped. But this is typical of industry, armed forces fighting. The same thing takes place here in the United States if you follow that industry. I mentioned that in 1955, Al made IAI and FAA foreign repair station, which meant we could work on airplanes with American registry coming to Israel. They had an engine problem, a component problem. We could do, but we couldn't bid on any work in the United States. And again, Moshe Keret, trained by Schwimmer, calls me and said, why can't we get this work? And I said, I have no idea. Let me look into it. And again, we formed a team and we decided it wasn't a law, it was a policy. It was a policy put up and supported by three very powerful unions who didn't want any work out of the United States. The Teamsters, the auto workers, etc. So we go to Congress, they're holding hearings on foreign repair stations. Can they work? And the three union guys are up front, but these are the suits and ties. And the guys in the back are the guys with the leather coats, Union 6342. And they're criticizing, do you want your airplane that your wife and children are with the engine overhauled in the Philippines? Well, the bell rings to vote, and I go up to the union guys. I say, Israel Aircraft's a union company. We're the Histadrut. Don't label us in the same group. And they said, you're absolutely right. So they changed the policy allowing Israel, because Schwimmer put that feature in between 1986 and 2000. We got 5 billion, that's what it be, of work from American Airlines to work at Bedek. And since 2000, I'm told it's another 5 billion, just from a little change working Congress with the help of the Jewish mafia. There is a Jewish mafia in Washington. All right, what else can I tell you about? Another big area that Al started, came to fruition after he left because of the seeds he planted, was UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles. At one time, every unmanned aerial vehicle in the United States inventory was designed or built in Israel. There were even Israelis who didn't like some of IAI's designs, who came to America and started their own company and sold them to the CIA. But the Navy had them, the Army had them, etc. In 1980, 79 was the first operational year of the UAVs with the Israeli military. In 1986, we had the Lviv fighter, which made its first flight. And as you probably know, there's books written on it, on why it was killed. I'd reach back and get a book where a reporter, what happened, the Americans set up teams to discourage Israel building its own sophisticated fighter. And when the cabinet voted by one vote to kill the program, Aarons resigned. But that's Israel. In 1990, the first family of multi-layered missiles, the Arrow, is launched. Now I can talk about dozens and dozens of programs. I want to see how long I'm talking. 35 minutes. All right. If there are a bunch of questions, I'll stop now and I'll come back with some additional information. Any questions?
We have a question from this family. Go ahead.
Actually, there's nothing in the chat box, but I had read a story some time ago, and I don't know if this is true or not true, but when Israel buys aircraft from the United States, F-15s or whatever it is, they always buy a couple of extra ones, more than they really need. And they take that extra one or two and literally take the planes apart to understand exactly how it works, literally what screws there are, where they go. Is that a true story? Or
it's a half-truth story. IAI, no, wrong. The Israeli Air Force always goes to improve whatever they buy here. And they do add a new engine, add a new flight control system, maybe change the rudder system. They do something. They always go to improve the airplane, but they don't take it apart and copy it and make a Chinese copy like the Chinese do. They just go to improve it. Just like I told you, they added a GE J79 engine to the Mirage to make it the Kafir. That's more typical of what they do.
Thank you.
I had a question also. You mentioned briefly that there was some FBI charges that he escaped. I just, while you were talking, I did a little search on Wikipedia, so I saw that he was actually convicted of violating I guess an act that they
Yeah,
accused him of
I know the whole
breaking.
story.
I wasn't quite clear. Yeah, great.
Okay, I'm looking for my notes on that. What Al did in bringing those airplanes and pilots and ammunition to Israel was illegal. The United States said you cannot provide any support to Israel. Even you could not provide any support to the Arabs, but everybody else was supporting the Arabs. The Jewish agent, I'm going to tell you, it's the only good story in your life you're going to hear about J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover sent his agents, FBI, Treasury, to stop them. It was in the movie, if you see the movie, and if you read the book, all the details are in there, saving Israel. But Hoover called the Jewish agency in, opened his drawer, and pulled it out and says, you see these? These are charges against this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. I'm not filing them if you give me your word that when Israel wins the war, they'll all come back and turn themselves in. And they all did. And they were put on trial. The Jewish agency paid their fines, about 10, 12, 15,000. The only one who didn't get fined was Sam Lewis. Sam Lewis he was the main pilot training everybody that Al brought in. And then he became El Al's chief pilot when the war ended. Al lost his rights of citizenship, which means you can't vote, can't run for office, you can't get a firearm. And Al said to me, I never did anything. Now, he had a friend named Hank Greenspun. If anybody knows, Hank was Bugsy Siegel's PR guy at the Flamingo Hotel. Hank then bought the Las Vegas Review paper, became very wealthy. He gave Nixon $100,000 and Nixon pardoned him. Schwimmer got his pardon from Clinton without him asking. I don't have all the details. I have down here Tommy Lee Jones and Al Gore. Now go figure that out for yourself. I think Al Gore was Tommy Lee Jones' roommate at college, and it came up between them, and they went to Clinton, and Al got his full pardon a few days before Clinton left, because I carried the pardon to him.
Okay, thank you for that.
Only one American went to jail, Charlie something, and he was the only Christian, and he went to jail, but he was on a separate trial. Anything else?
Does anybody have any questions for
I had a
Marvin?
question.
Great.
I was trying to type it, but I'm not fast enough. In 1948, when this whole thing started and airplanes were being bought for $5,000, it said on the video, on the documentary, where was that money coming from for all those planes that were being purchased?
I'm looking for a book that I can't find. I thought I brought it up with me. Where the hell is it? In addition to this book, there's a book called The Pledge, Pledge, by Leonard Slater. To give you an idea of the book, Al Schwimmer's only 2 chapters. There are many Al Schwimmers and many stories that will blow your mind. I tried to get the movie rights for the book, but Slater would not sell it. For example, they tried to steal an aircraft carrier out of Norfolk so they could load these planes and not fly them to Israel. Hank Greenspun is raiding Navy munitions dumps in Hawaii, stealing material. I'm not ignoring your question. The money came from the Jewish agency. Where did the Jewish agency get the money? Ben Gurion came to the United States in 1946, and they assembled a group of prominent Jews and said there's going to be a state of Israel. Use your own imagination after that.
Thank you.
The money, where else are we going to get the money? From our landsmen, ourselves. Although I do want to point out that many of the pilots that Al brought to Israel were not Jews. Some of them really believed in helping. Anything else?
What
right.
about his personal life? I just had one quick question about that. What was his personal
Two
life?
children who I tried to contact because I wanted them to watch this, because I don't think they've seen my presentation. I don't think they've seen the movie. One's a garage mechanic, and I don't know what the other one is. About 3 years before Al died, he was finally honored with the highest prize you can get in Israel, which is called the Israeli prize. Okay. Al called me on the phone, said they finally given me the prize. You know why? Because Perez is the president. That was his buddy. And he says, I put a ticket aside for you. I want you there. And, you know, I'm a poor Bronx kid. I go there, and there are 4 people sitting besides his family, which are in the front. There's Misha Ahrens, myself, Moshe Keret, president of Israel, Ziggy Ariel, president of Israel, to honor Al. And it was the only Jewish event I ever went to in my life that no food was served. I can't believe it. I think they changed the culture of Israel. That day, person I was driving with, we stopped in Abu Ghosh. Did you ever go to any of the Arab restaurants in Abu Ghosh? They're fantastic. And we sit down, who walks in? Al and his family. So I get to meet his kids again and everything. All right, I don't want to go over the hour, so I want to show you some things. I told you Al had no ego. He had none, couldn't care less. Well, I have an ego. It's not an ego, it's really a sense of pride of what we accomplished. My daughter, who did the first of these briefings, would always say he created many jobs, brought millions of dollars of work, which is true. But it's not by yourself, it's a team that's doing it. Now, I don't know if you have any Israelis who could see this picture. I don't know how clear it is. This is Schwimmer. This is Perez, Rabin, Benny Peled. What's unusual? They're all wearing ties. Did you ever go to an event in Israel where all the Israeli leadership is wearing ties? It's remarkable. Now, in my job, I had the benefit of meeting all these, working with this guy. Here I am with Asa Weitzman, and I'm introducing him to some people we brought in from the United States. Here's with Shamir at the Paris Air Show. God, was I young. Look at that. And please note, here's Shimon. And please notice he's smiling. And here with Aaron's. Again, please notice my tie. That's very important. I wore great ties. This one's going to shock you. Here's Rabin and I 40 years ago. And Rabin and I about a month before he was killed. Again, but notice he's smiling in both pictures. They're laughing at my ties. And here's Ehud Barak. And here's a photo I'm very proud of. This is when the Arrow got fully funded and had its first success. This is the entire Arrow team, military civilian. And we got an award, and Moshe Keret, the president, wanted me to hold the award because we got them the money. Now, speaking of ties, I don't know if you can see this. Here's another guy who liked my ties. Can you see who that is? Can you see? It's Bill Clinton. I don't know why it's not clearer, but Bill's holding my tie. It's a long story. I invited Hillary to speak at a function I was running, and I showed her that picture with Bill. Well, she grabbed the cameraman and took the same picture, holding the tie. I mean, what does that have to do with Al Schwimmer? Nothing, but I'm very proud of what I accomplished. I want to show you something. Oh, first I want to say something. David, I remember many years ago, I invited you and your bride to eat at a restaurant in Jaffa. It was one of my favorite restaurants. Do you remember? I can't hear you. Take yourself, there you go.
Oh, yes, I remember that.
And you told me,
Upstairs, it was a very special restaurant.
and you told me it was the best meal you ever had in Israel.
Yeah, at that time.
Okay, that's very good. You're a diplomat.
Because
Yes.
this was a long time ago. They have better restaurants now, but that was the best at that time.
Well, that restaurant's closed. The owner died. It used to be called Alhambra or
Yeah.
Shea Christian. Now, why am I bringing it up?
I don't
Because
know.
the first time I ever ate in that restaurant and knew about it is Al Schwimmer took me to dinner there.
Oh,
That's the connection. That's how I knew about that restaurant. So you see, you're part of the story.
glad to be part of the story. Yona, you didn't mention that Yona Klimavitsky, she was related to us actually, and
Yeah.
and you were the one who found that out, and we brought her to the United States. And Nadine is here and it was Thanksgiving time, and we were at Nadine's house in Atlantic City in Ventnor Margate, and there's a
Yep.
beautiful picture with Yona in it.
Yeah, our family name used to be Klemavitsky.
Right.
That was Yona's last name. My grandfather changed it to Klemow when he moved to this metropolitan city called Hazleton. That's a joke.
No.
I want to show you one other letter. You can't read it, but I'm proud of it. Not every day you get letters from the Prime Minister addressed to you personally. There's a long story behind this letter. Ehud Barak left the army. He comes to the United States, and we're interviewing him. How can he help us? What can he do as a civilian? Well, the interview's over, and I'm with my company president. And we go downstairs, and his car and security aren't there. He says, I got to get to the State Department. I said, I'll drive you. My car's across the street. I played golf that morning. My dirty clothes are on the back seat. I changed. I don't think I washed my car in a month. And my president says, you're going to take a possible future prime minister of Israel in your dirty car? And I'm a little wise ass. I said, Ehud, if you ever become prime minister, I'll clean my car. He becomes prime minister, and he writes me a letter. I'll just read you the last part. The challenges are formidable, dear Marvin, blah, 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 blah. It won't be easy, but I know I can always count on your friendship and support. Nava joins me in sending you our warmest and very best regards. We both look forward to seeing you soon in your clean car. This is 2 years after it happened. Here's another letter I'm proud of. It's not to me. It's Clinton writing to Yitzhak Rabin. Dear Yitzhak, sincerely, Bill. We were at one of the problems when you're working Washington, and Schwimmer taught me this. Don't be afraid. If you get in trouble because you did something, not because you were afraid to do something. And we had lots of problems in certain elements of State Department, Pentagon, etc. We were trying to get Israeli parts from our missiles shipped to American companies to use for commercial purposes, commercial launches. And the State Department would not approve the license. And anytime a prime minister came here, the Jewish mafia of Elbit, Raphael, Elsin, IAI would get together as a team, say, what do we want to take off the table so that Rabin will not have to argue it? We all agreed that he should raise this issue. And if he raises it right, Clinton will approve it. Again, we sent out our feelers to find out. So now we go to the State Department. The letter is written. And we go to the Pentagon. We say, you guys are still holding up this license. We don't understand it. What's the matter with you? Well, we don't know. I said, the president's approved it. And they said, well, we haven't seen that. I pulled the letter out of my pocket. Well, I said, let me help you. Here's the president's letter. And one guy in the meeting said, I don't care what the president says. My job is to protect American technology, and Israel should not be doing this. To make a long story short, that's what you run into. I don't care what the president said. The technology came to the United States, or the product came, and it was never used. They found other ways. I can't go into details. MTCR, Missile Technology Control Regime, and everything. Now, what did I really do in the Washington office? I had 3 jobs. One, to sell Israeli products around the world. If it contains American technology, American funding, or American products, you need a State Department license. So my job was to work in all those agencies and get these licenses approved. Israeli products are in about 70 countries around the world. The second thing, I'm sure all of you are businessmen, you need three things to succeed in working Washington when you're working military programs. This is a quiz. Let me see if you can get the third one. Funding, and what do you think the third one might be? Funding. I was a registered foreign agent for the government of Israel through Israel Aircraft, because IAI is owned by the government, working Congress and all the agencies to get the funding for our program. Let me stress something. I didn't do it alone. I had tremendous help. I had APAC. I had lots of friends working it. No one does it by themselves. You got to be a team member, which in Israel, sometimes it's hard because you got to figure out which team you're on first. Okay, I'm about coming to the end. But I promised my cousin I would show her something at the end. Okay, it's about time. It's almost an hour. When I went to Schwimmer's house in January of 1970, 51 years ago, Al collects art. I collect. I have a lot of art around the house. And Al had on the wall a metal, something metal. And I couldn't figure out what the hell was it. And he told me it's a piece of magnesium from a Russian MiG that was shot down during the '67 war. And magnesium, when it burns, you can't put it out. It's burning. So people were throwing sand on it, stuff on it, and it fused a lot of the sand because the heat is so high into glass. It was it became a piece of art. And art's in the eyes of the beholder. I thought it was great. I said, Al, there's one thing missing. You need to put a plaque on it. He said, Marvin, what kind of a plaque? I said, it should say Moti Hud's variations on a theme of McCoyan. Now I'll explain that. Moti Hud was the chief of the Israeli Air Force in the '67 war. McCoyan was the head of the design bureau that designed the MiG. Did I say Mirage? I meant to say MiGs. So Moti Hud's Air Force shot down this airplane. Moti Hud's variation on a theme of McCoyan. And I always kid out, did you put up the plaque? Yep. After the 1974 war, I went to his office. He says, take that package home with you. I'm going to show you what the package was. This is part of a Syrian MiG shot down in the '73 war. And I did exactly what Al did. I put it on a blackboard, hung it as a piece of art. But I have to have a different plaque because it was a different chief of the Air Force then. Don't fall. It's falling. Okay. And it would have to say Benny Pellets, because Benny Pellet then was the chief of the Air Force. Variation on a theme of McCoyan. So the two wives would say Schwimmer and Marvin are the only two idiots who take old Air Force MiGs and make them pieces of art. But let me tell you, every time I walk by that picture, I think of Al. Al raised the technological level of Israel. The bottom line, today IAI is 16,000 employees. We're doing near $4 billion a year in work. We have a $12 billion backlog, all from the genius of this one man. And the next three presidents, when Al left, were all people he trained, were all his people. And there's not a statue to Al. There's no stamp to Al. And as someone who admired him, in my aging years, I made up my mind I was going to do this talk to as many people, because remember how I opened? His name was Al Schwimmer, and nobody's ever heard of him. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
so much,
Marvin.
Marvin. I just want to remind people, if you haven't seen it, A Wing and a Prayer is the name of the movie, that PBS special, and you could still see it on Amazon Prime. Also, you mentioned there were some books. There's Saving Israel, and you said,
Israel by Boaz Dvir.
right, by
Also
the-
did the movie. And
Right.
the other book is The Pledge. I could have sworn I brought it up.
that's all right. We can look up The Pledge and find
Leonard
it.
Slater by The Pledge. It's a great book because it really gives you much more detail. Don't forget, Al was the aviation part. There was many other things besides aviation.
Thank you for a very
Would you
informative,
do me a
enlightening.
favor if we got a few minutes? And
Yes,
plug everybody, because I see some of my cousins I haven't said hello.
of course. Take your
Yes.
time.
Marvin.
So here, I see Nadine,
Yeah,
and who else is on?
Gary.
And Betty.
Oh, I don't see Gary and Betty.
Well, we're younger than you. We.
You know what?
I have to know you're older.
Esther's here too.
I'm going to remove the spotlight, so then you can go press gallery view, and you should be able to see everybody.
Where's gallery view?
It's
Upper right.
upper right where it says view. If you click it, there's some choices. There's speaker, gallery, and full screen. If you choose gallery view, you'll see everybody.
All right, good.
All right,
There we go.
there you go.
Hey, Gary, you look terrible. You're really not.
Listen,
All right, I
good
thought
thing I sent you the email and you sent me the thing over again.
yeah.
Otherwise, I would have missed you.
There's Esther. I see Esther now. Hello,
Hi,
Esther. Okay, very good. You know, we live in a different world, folks. This last year has been a totally different world for all of us.
But,
Finally, I know it's ending because for the first time in 14 months, my wife played Mahjong. So I know it's ending. Thank you all for paying attention. I hope you found it of interest.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marvin.
Marvin,
Thank
you
you
were
very much.
wonderful.
Excellent.
You were
To
wonderful.
my friends in Washington, I really didn't tell what I did, all the stories. And when I went to work for Israel Aircraft, they would say, "Who's that, El Al?" Because they didn't know Israel. So over the years, when I started talking to my friends about some of the things, and some of the people that were at my house,
To put his cone on.
some of the pictures and the photos, I had another line that I used. You see, all those lies I told you were true about what I was doing and who I was seeing. Thank you for all watching.
All right. Thank you very
Thank you again,
much.
Marvin.
Marvin, say hi
Yes.
to Brenda.
I will. Brenda's
Thank you so
watching.
much.
Brenda's watching Roots. What's that show? Finding Your Roots.
Sharon, congratulations on thinking of having this program at your show.
Yes, thank you again, Sharon, for allowing us to do this. It was wonderful.
Bye-bye,
My
everybody.
pleasure, everybody.
Night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so
Night.
much.
Good night.
Thank you, Marvin. It was wonderful. I
Thank
really
you, Marvin.
enjoyed what you had to say.
Thank you.
Really extremely informative. And this whole program and about Al Schwimmer, I never knew anything about this. I knew you worked for whatever and you jumped out of airplanes. I know you flew in
Well, that was my
helicopters and all that kind of stuff. You didn't even talk about that. But incredible person.
Schwimmer, again, he had no ego. I couldn't get him to be interviewed by the press. I couldn't bring him to Congress. I couldn't bring him to, you guys do it. That's what I pay you for. Leave me alone.
Give our love to Brenda.
I will, definitely. Goodbye, everybody.
Okay, Bye-bye. Thank you again.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Bye.
Our pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.